The title of this message is American Fascism. American Fascism. I fear for the future of the country because I see a form of fascism taking over thought in America. I saw on the TV some revelations came out about, I won't go into details, but the big pharma, actually the executive said they have control over the American regulatory system. Like the guy that used to be head of the FDA, he retired, took his government pension, and now he's making, I assume, big bucks on the board of a major big pharma company. The same thing happens to generals in the Pentagon. When Eisenhower warned about the industrial military complex, and it is true. Even look at the current people in charge. They move back and forth from major. Well, what Eisenhower said was, in the past, when America went to war, companies like Ford, General Motors, they simply shifted from cars to making tanks and planes. And then when the war was over, they went back to making cars and trucks. But he says, but now we have a permanent industry which apparently makes vast profits because defense spending is vast, to be a superpower, and those industries only make war materials. And that money is like pressure on Congress and pressure to push toward warfare. That's what Eisenhower was warning about, and I can see it. I can see it coming up with Ukraine. There's pressure, a lot of profit to be made. And I'm going to define fascism for you. Now, fascism and communism both are socialistic, a government that runs things in a socialistic pattern. But the difference between fascism is they use big business and many businesses to do much of their bidding. They kind of help each other. We regulate the big business, but big business helps us regulate and control the people and the workers. They work together, like big pharma and the government. And obviously, big pharma is going to make a big profit off things that the government will require people to do. And same in the industrial military complex. I even see it in academia. For instance, if you're in academia and you're a scientist, you don't believe in global warming, guess how much research money you get? Butkus. And that's actually true even in social sciences. If you don't believe in social justice, guess how easy to get your papers published. Very difficult. It's like government money's influence in academia. We could go on, but the point is, it's a form of fascism. Now you're all going to say, well, this isn't as bad as the fascism of Mussolini and Hitler. True, but things don't always start off in extremes. They ratchet up. How bad can it ratchet up? Well, and how fast? Those are all things to speculate. When I look at the book of Revelation, it talks about the mark of the beast. And it says you can't buy or sell if you don't have the mark of the beast. I imply from that there's an economic part of the dictatorship. It's not just the police state. It's the economics. In other words, banking, retailing, are all going to be working for the government dictatorship. You see, it sounds more like fascism than it does communism. And the truth be told, fascism is more, at least in some respects, more effective than communism. We maybe could argue that, but from an economic sense, it really is. And I see that happening all over the Western world, including America. And you're thinking, but we have separation of powers, and congressmen, they're going to fight for our rights. I'm not even going to answer that question. Let's let you think about how well all that is working, because I see courts and judges being pushed by maybe their miseducation, all in the same direction. Same with big media. If a reporter reports something, even if it's true that they don't want reported, guess what's likely to happen to his job? And you know reporters are soon learning that. There's only one perspective they want. And the good media is being cut out of circulation. Like Dish and another main media, I got the name wrong, but they dropped OAN. Did they drop OAN because it was costing them too much money? They dropped it for political reasons. You know that, don't you? And I'm hearing another conservative media is about to be dropped by a major circulator. None of that is coincidence. You see it with education. We're being controlled. So I'm going to say, pray for our government. I know the Bible says pray for your government, but I want to ask us to pray for our government so that we can have peace and religious freedom, and that America does not become a fascist dictatorship. Even a halfway one is still bad. And obviously I'm opinionated, so you all know that. Most of the people in this room probably agree with me, but people who will see this on the video, of course I could be wrong, and everything is wonderful up there in D.C. and all is well, and I'm just overly worried. Even still, pray for America, because I really believe this. America is, remember when Ronald Reagan said, we're the world's best hope? If freedom dies in America, it's gone everywhere. You think about it. No, the British will save freedom in the world. They've gone far, and even the Australians actually have camps for people that didn't agree with certain policies the government was pushing, and they locked Australians up, just like the communists do in camps. I'm not making this up, because you think, what? And I can tell you about churches and pastors being arrested in Canada, churches being burned in Canada. I'm not talking about, some place where you might expect it. America is the only country that has a lot of influence around the world, big enough economy, a lot of influence. America is the only hope the world has. If America goes down, the world will go into a darker, more dictatorial, more fascist, and other forms of dictator things going on. You look at what's happening in Brazil. I'm going to read Jeremiah 29:7. Jeremiah 29:7. Seek the peace. Now, this is advice that Jeremiah gave the Israelites as they were in various places in the Babylonian Empire. Seek the peace of the city whether I've caused you to be carried away captives. Pray unto the Lord or Jehovah for it, for in the peace thereof shall you have peace. In other words, pray for the government of the local places that you're in, because if those governments become nicer, it's going to be better for you. That's what he's saying. But these are pagan governments. Yes, but he's still saying pray for them that they'll be better in their behavior, because that'll be better for you. We can apply that to all kinds of countries in the world. Psalms 122:6. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love you. And I do believe, and there are other scriptures that we're told to pray for Jerusalem. And if you don't pray for Jerusalem, bad things might happen. Do you know that, I guess it was yesterday or last night, but I didn't hear any details. Our media just is so hollow. 7 people were shot outside a Jewish synagogue in Jerusalem. They have no details of who did the shooting, why they did it, and I could ask a bunch of others. No details. I have no idea what's going on. Nothing. But pray for the peace in Jerusalem. Well, if America is the 10 lost tribes of the birthright of Jacob, you could apply that same principle. Pray for America, that our government will be better than you might expect. Congress will get a backbone. The courts will start making reasonable decisions. Local governments will do what the people want done. Democracy will start to show itself. Also, we don't want to be in a proxy war. Right now, we're in a proxy war with Russia. They've admitted that. You might say, well, that's happened before. Vietnam could be described as a proxy war with Russia. So could the first Afghan war. Yeah, that's true. as a Vietnam vet, wars, even proxy wars, can get hotter and bigger, like Vietnam became. And the thing about war is like fire. Like if you have a campfire, you build the rocks around it so the fire can't get out of the campfire area. But fire is a dangerous thing. A wind could come up, and all of a sudden the flame gets on a tent, and then they knock the tent, and it gets on a piece of wood. And in other words, war is like fire. You think you can contain it so that the industrial military complex makes billions of dollars profit. Oh, maybe a few thousand of our young men get chewed up in the process, but it doesn't affect America too much. Well, see, when Putin, I was told this by somebody heard online, I don't know if it's true, that Putin is making threats to Germany if they send their powerful Leopard tank into Ukraine. The Russians are going to consider that an act of war and may attack Germany. Probably that's bluffing or saber rattling, but here's the but part. If you corner a dangerous animal like a rat, assuming that the West has better weapons than the Russians have, that's what everybody's newer stuff. And if we can pour enough of our newer stuff and we're giving them our satellite intelligence, we can start really putting a hurt on the Russians. If things go badly, who is to say what the Russians' next move might not be? Do you know they have a super torpedo and a super robot-controlled mini-sub that can carry an atom bomb that's, I hope I get this right, 33 times stronger than the bomb that hit Hiroshima. That's one way of measuring it. And that thing could be like, I forget, 1,000 meters under the sea and go toward a port city like New York, and probably you can't stop it. Or if you stopped it like 20 miles away and it exploded, that would still destroy New York anyway. Now, I'm not saying that will happen. You say, yeah, but then we'll blow up Moscow. Oh, yeah, well, that makes things better, right? You see what I mean? I'm not saying any of that will happen, but I'm just saying playing with fire is dangerous. That's all I'm saying. Pray for America that they don't do anything stupid. And I want to look at the fascists of Europe in the 1920s and 30s, because nobody thought they were that dangerous. And I'm going to start with Mussolini, who started fascism. Hope I tell the story accurately. Mussolini was somewhat of a murderer as a teenager. He stabbed people. And maybe he had a troubled childhood. Maybe some of that's debatable, but in World War I, they had that trench war from the Baltic Sea to the Swiss border. It was like no man's land between the two sides, and it was, you've seen the bombs and craters and barbed wires. Well, there were certain soldiers who would go into that no man's land to carry messages, sabotage the other side, whatever. And they got famous for doing that, and they were called stormtroopers. And Mussolini got famous as a stormtrooper in Italy. And Italy got shafted when World War I ended. They were low on the totem pole. They said, we lost 500,000 men. We came in the war on what they thought was the winning side, and we won and didn't get anything. They were mad. So Mussolini played that anger, and eventually he ran a newspaper. He got thousands of Italian men to all dress in black, and they fought with the communists who also were in the streets of Italy and Europe, and they outfought them, and his stormtroopers wore black, and they beat up, poisoned his political opposition, and eventually they started a march on Rome where they would come from different cities and they get more of them, and people in the Roman government, somewhat of a democracy, saw these thousands of stormtroopers all in black, and they basically capitulated and let Mussolini become dictator of Italy. Hitler tried that, it didn't work in Germany. But what's the interesting thing is, Antifa dresses just like Mussolini stormtroopers, all black, bottom of the face. I mean, it's like they model themselves after, and they come ready to fight, with sticks and swords and armed guards and shields. I mean, they come ready to fight. They unleashed them last week in Atlanta. over some minor police shooting. It wasn't really that big a deal. I'm not sure what their political objectives, but they're clearly a weapon of the far left party. If you don't know that, you just haven't been watching the news. Clearly. And they can use what I call, this is ticklish, but I'll say it anyway, the emotionalism of people in the inner city. Whenever there's something bad that happens, or the media over focuses on the video showing the bad that happens, and they get these people all emotional, and then Antifa, often night rallies are where things go bad, and then anarchists from Antifa, the real anarchists, the real fascists, infiltrate the crowd, and things go from mostly peaceful demonstrations. They're like CNN, and behind them all kind of buildings are burning. Now, I believe that did not happen last night, as far as I know. But I still worry about it, that it could happen again. And in other words, everybody in these mobs that are demonstrating doesn't have good intentions. Some are anarchists. Some like burning and looting and stealing. Some even like violence. I mean, there are bad people. And they use good people as fodder. And they're even told to do that. It's in their description how to do things. Try to get inside and infiltrate a crowd so that the so-called sincere people are out front, and then you start the fires and you get it off. Now, that happened well for them in the 2000. And made people, well, we elected conservative Antifa and the mobs will come back out. And I guess it worked to some extent. Well, Hitler did that. By the way, Hitler wanted to get black shirts, but they couldn't find enough of them in German stores. They could only get tan and brown, so he had his brown shirts. But they did the same thing Mussolini's did, and they were effective. And you'll see stories, as Hitler and the party got more power, of German members of their parliament, the Reichstag, having to run through a gauntlet of their thugs to get into the parliament. You can imagine how this could affect the politicians. And they destroyed one newspaper, the Munich, because they started in Munich, and the Munich Times knew what they were up to. Well, his stormtroopers busted up that paper many times. And eventually, when Hitler got real power, only one or two of their editors got to the Swiss border in time. The rest died in concentration camps. Total control of the press. My point is, people think, well, nothing like that could happen in America. We're too, and I'm trying to think of too what? You realize Germany was the best educated country in the world in the 1930s. The best educated. Just remember that in case you think that's education is going to save people from doing things stupid. Romans 12:18 and 19. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. So we should try to live peaceably with all men if possible. And then verse 19. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, rather give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So I'm not asking people to get out there and fight with the stormtroopers or Antifa, the modern-day American version of Mussolini's stormtroopers, because God will take care of the vengeance. But we can pray about it. We can ask God to kind of slow them down, make them make strategic mistakes, make some of our politicians and judges say, hey, this isn't right. Do the right thing. It's possible. And stay humble. Stay humble. I'm going to, I've often said that we have to be careful not get the big head, stay humble. I'm going to apply that in a political sense. Our leaders in Washington have to stay humble. I heard a congressman and others, but one particular one, or two of them I can think of, they said, America's going to remain the world's greatest superpower, and we in the Senate are going to do it. And I thought, there's a certain arrogance in that statement. I'm not saying America isn't the world's superpower, but you got to be careful to not let that get you carried away. I would have mentioned Napoleon. And there's a story, and I wish I had written all the details down, but I'll just summarize it real briefly. A major politician from Austria who was Secretary of State, very famous man, and I probably won't pronounce his name right, so I won't say it, but he was trying to, Napoleon had pretty much control of all Central Europe except for Russia, and he was counseling Napoleon, going after Russia isn't really worth the trouble. I won't go into all the details, don't bother with it. Napoleon had so many unbelievable, well, at least he would consider, shocking victories, even when outnumbered. He felt he was unbeatable. Now you realize when you think you're unbeatable, that's bad thinking. And this man really worked hard, but Napoleon, just his arrogance, the way it was just out of the window. And in French it sounds great, Grande Army. I mean, in French it sounds great. His grand army marched off to disaster in the snow in Russia. You know, it's a big disaster. Psalms 118:8. It is better to trust in the Lord, or Jehovah, than to put your confidence in man. Even yourself, or even in a great general, or a great army. The Grand Army. I'm trying to say it the way the French say it, the Grand Army, unbeatable. There is, by the way, there's no such thing as unbeatable army or unbeatable football team, or people think it's true. It isn't true. Psalms 146:3. Put not your trust in princes, you know, our government's the best, nor in the Son of Man, in whom there's no help, or in the military itself. How many generals thought they were going into a battle or admiral that they could not possibly lose? And they lost. Maybe one of the most dramatic ones is Midway. The Japanese had the best trained pilots, the most carriers, the biggest fleet, more battleships, and at least at that point more submarines, and they were going to Midway, and in just a few minutes, planes from the Enterprise just lucked up at the right time when the Japanese were changing, had two different kind of bombs. They were changing, they had spotted part of the U.S. fleet, and they were changing their bombs from land bombing to aerial bombing of things on sea, which had both sets of bombs on deck. And these American bombers dived on 3 carriers, and within 2 or 3 minutes, the war in the Pacific changed. Those 3 carriers were underwater, and they came back the next day and got the last one. And all of a sudden, air power in the Pacific changed. And America could just not worry about the Pacific, focus on Europe. And anyway, that suddenly, the Japan went from being the top dog to what just happened? They didn't even believe it themselves. And you're going to say, but America got so lucky. Or we got blessed. Or whatever. You could argue that. You could argue it either way. My point is, you can't count on things that you think you can count on. And if you get the big head, like they had never had defeat. You've never been defeated, at least not yet. Never start thinking that way. It's bad. Pray that our government doesn't get the big head. I think they're getting it. Proverbs 29:25. The fear of man brings a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. We should pray to God and trust in God. No matter what does happen, trust God will get us through it. Put our trust in God, not in government, not in all those politicians. And I'm not saying don't vote for the better of the 2 candidates and pray for it, but still, put your trust in God. Pray for America. We're still the world's last great hope. I believe that. And remember that famous statement that a politician said? He said, we shouldn't worry about whether God's on our side. We should get on God's side. Remember that statement I quoted here before? Well, we should pray that our government gets on God's side, or as much as that's possible. I think in this world it's not going to be 100% possible. What we know from Bible prophecy is evil will get a few years to run wild, maybe 3.5, 5, 6, 7 years at the most. but at least 3.5 for sure, based on Daniel and some other prophecies. Probably at least 42 months, which isn't much time. And maybe we'll be protected from all that, or we'll pass away before it comes, or we'll be a heroic martyr. But the bad guys will get a few years, and then Christ will come back, smash them, and that'll be it. So we know bad things are coming in a few years, briefly. But I think we can pray to delay it as long as possible for the sake of us and our progeny and our neighbors, and you know what I mean? Pray that God can delay it, and America could maybe hold it back a little bit. I think so, and I think the devil is putting his focus on America because he sees what I think we see. America still potentially the freest society in the world. By the way, you know all these people that are pouring across America's border? Like there was a whole ship full from China that came and from Haiti. Why are they coming? Because the Chinese, Haitians, Cubans, and all those people from all over the world, because they know something you don't know. America's still the freest, relatively prosperous society in the world. It's true. I mean, some of them are also going to other places, but America, according to a survey, is still the #1 destination of people that want freedom. How do you like that? But the government says we're full of racism and hate and everything. Yeah, well, that's media propaganda. The people in the third world, they know better. You ask them, they'll tell you, I want to go to America. So if I were the devil, who would I put my focus on? The American government and the American people. I mean, that's my opinion. Now, here's a corny story I'll kind of use. It's called Nervous Patient. The guy tells the nurse, I'm really worried about being a patient here. The nurse says, why are you worried? He says, well, last week I read that a man came in the hospital with heart trouble and he died of malaria. The nurse says, well, that's in a different hospital, not our hospital. She says, if someone comes to this hospital with heart trouble, they die of heart trouble. He goes, how can you use that corny joke? Well, I'm thinking about how to use it. But it just shows you, when there are problems, right? And the problems might stick around. Pray for America, the world's last best hope, at least to hold back evil. But trust in God. Don't trust in your government. I still say vote for the better of the two candidates, whatever, however you want to word it. Pray that our government, now we have to stay humble too, so I'm sure I want to say that, but pray that our government gets more humble. That our government gets more humble and realizes, well, wait a minute, that our government gets more on God's side. Because if our government gets the big head, we're the only superpower, like some senators say, we could get sucked into a war trap that could kill, like say some young man, and this is actually true, joins the National Guard to defend his community. Well, you know that the way it's worded, the government, you know, the military can take charge of the National Guard. He could be fighting in the snow in Ukraine next winter. I mean, that's possible, it really is. He has nothing to say about it. So, both Hitler and Napoleon, after stunning successes, believed they were unbeatable, both of them. And they both did exactly the same time and almost exactly the same dates. And they met the same disaster in the snow. One of the big battles that messed up Hitler was in Kiev, in Ukraine. And I'll just make it real short. The Russians launched in 1941 and 1942 two winter offensives against supposedly an unbeatable German army. And a lot of Germans died of frostbite. It was horrible. The Russians are better. They had soldiers in white and with snowshoes and, you know, total white parkas, and they cut the heart out of the German army. You would, if you read some of those stories, and Hitler, of course, did a lot of stupid things, which he wasn't as smart as he thought he was, but you felt sorry for the German soldiers. It was horrible. And the same thing happened to Napoleon's army in the snows, in Moscow. And as the French army retreated, and that winter, the Russians it was just horrible. You just read about it. I think something like only 5% of the Grand Army ever got back to Paris. Or some number, if I get the number wrong, some number like that. Unbelievable numbers died in frostbite and snow in Russia. Now, both men got the big head. You think, well, that couldn't happen to America. Our politicians, our senators, our generals are too smart. You sure about that? You sure about that? Look at what happened in Afghanistan if you think they're too smart. We're the world's only superpower. I like what Teddy Roosevelt said. He said, walk softly. Walk softly. Now, he did say carry a big stick, and he was a big part of building up our Navy fleet and all that stuff that you probably read about. But he actually was a peacemaker, won the Nobel Peace Prize. And when he said walk softly, he probably was one of our greatest presidents, at least in many respects. Though the city of New York has taken his statue down and gotten rid of it for some weird thing. But what could I say about the current government of the city of New York? But Teddy Roosevelt is no longer honored. By the way, he was the police chief who made the New York Police Department one of the best in the world. They were all corrupt, and it's a great story how corrupt they were. He went out there and walked the patrols, found out about them in gambling and prostitution houses and a whole bunch of, and he got a system, and they really turned the New York NYPD around, and greatest police commissioner, and actually got rid of much of the corruption. As a matter of fact, he got rid of so much corruption in New York, the corrupt politicians. I'm not making that. We got to get this guy out of the state of New York. He's dangerous to, all the corruption. Let's make him vice president, because the vice president is Washington. He has nothing to do. We don't have to worry about him. Get him out. So they got him to be vice president. Of course, you know the rest of the story. The point I'm making is he was smart enough to say, walk softly. Don't brag about the power you have. Like, we're the world's only superpower. Well, I'm going to read 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. I know this is applied to us Christians and to Paul, and we should apply that, and we should work to stay humble. And that's always a problem. If people tell you how smart you are and you know stuff, don't let it go to your head. Nobody is as smart as we ought to be, right? Or as good as we want to be. But I'm going to apply it to the American government. I want to apply this, pray that our government starts thinking this way. Lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan. Probably some kind of eye headache from an eye disease, probably, to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. In other words, God was worried about keeping Paul humble. Concerning this thing, because Paul had a lot of power, he was clearly the greatest of all the apostles, the greatest evangelist in the first century. Without a doubt, even the others admitted that his letters should be canonized as scripture. You'll actually see that in 2 Peter. So with that kind of greatness, God wanted to keep him humble. So I should be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. In other words, when you're humble, that's better for you. That's really what he's saying. Therefore, most gladly, I'd rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Verse 10 of 2 Corinthians 12. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. And here's the key thing I want to say before I end. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul said, when I am weak, then I'm strong. In other words, when our government realizes we just can't do everything, there's limits to what money can buy. When our government realizes there are limitations, even militarily, then they're going to be wiser and stronger. Sometimes it's better to avoid a war or let some other people fight their own border war. You know, you can be a humanitarian aid, but stay out of it for the most part. But when I am weak, then I'm strong. When our government appreciates its limits, then it will be a wiser government. Pray for our humility for our government, because playing with fire is dangerous. We don't want to draft. My grandson could get drafted. You're thinking, oh, none of this could happen. When I saw the black shirts in Atlanta last weekend, dressed exactly like Mussolini's stormtroopers, I thought, whoa, our people are following the model. And they're getting big business to do their bidding. It's pure fascism. Now maybe because we have state governments and they all are falling in line, maybe we don't have the pure fascism yet. But don't you believe they're going to go after governors that don't fall in line at some point? Or at least they'll try. I kind of wish we had a stronger governor, but I won't complain. It could be worse. So pray for America. America is the only hope to stop fascism. And just remember, the devil will be up there for a very short time, and then he will fall. And we will win in the end. But we want to delay that as much as possible.